Excuse me, can you take a photo of me?
Sure, but if you had the new Samsung Galaxy Z Flip 6, you could snap your own hands-free selfies.
Really?
Watch! I just flex it to the perfect angle, set it down, and FlexCam with Galaxy AI automatically zooms for the perfect shot.
Whoa.
Post-worthy.
New profile pic-worthy.
Flex the newest Galaxy AI foldable Z Flip 6. Get yours now at Samsung.com. Samsung account login required. FlexCam length varies and is shorter than standard zoom length. Galaxy AI provided free until end of 2025 on supported devices.
Since we last talked about the legal battle surrounding the Badlands Golf Course, an internal memo acknowledged the city of Las Vegas will have to pay out about $500 million in damages. That's fully a quarter of their operating budget. As a result, Las Vegas has established a committee to explore hiring freezes, pausing projects, and even selling public land. Have no idea what I'm talking about? Don't worry, we got you. Today on CityCast Las Vegas, we're bringing back our Badlands Explainer with Steve Sebelius and Darcy Spears from Channel 13 so that you're up to date on all the dirt of this messy legal battle. It's Wednesday, September 4th. I'm Sarah Lohman, and here's what Las Vegas is talking about. Steve, Darcy, so I've been to the Badlands in South Dakota, a beautiful national park. I don't think that's the Badlands we're talking about here. What Badlands are we talking about here?
Well, what Badlands is here is honestly pretty bad. It's not the beautiful resort. It's not the beautiful national park. It's not a beautiful anything. What it's become is an eyesore in the Queens Ridge area, Rampart and Alta area, and Alta and Wallapai. It used to be a golf course. It was called the Badlands Golf Course. Now it has become a wasteland due to this years-long battle with the developer who owns the land and the city of Las Vegas, with some very wealthy Queens Ridge homeowners thrown into the mix.
Oh, I see. Okay, Steve, maybe you can give me a little bit of a timeline. How did this all get started?
Well, it actually got started as far back as 2005. That's when this land was purchased. It was operated as a golf course for a long time. Then the operator of the golf course decided he couldn't make money doing it anymore, sold the land. And a developer by the name of Yohan Lowie came in, wanted to develop this land as residential property. It's obviously worth more as residential property than it is as a defunct golf course. And that's where the trouble started, because you had neighbors who were adamantly opposed to developing that golf course. Now, normally in Las Vegas, this is a cynical view, but this is really the way it is. You have a group of neighbors who are living their lives, and a big developer comes in and says, we are going to develop this XYZ project right next to your neighborhood. The neighbors don't have any clout. They don't have any power. They try to fight City Hall. The developer almost always wins. They have the money to hire the land use experts and the attorneys who know what they're doing and who know about entitlements and who know the process. And so the battle is usually one-sided. In this case, however, it wasn't any group of neighbors. These neighbors were wealthy people themselves. They were attorneys, and they fought this at City Hall.
And they were casino moguls. We're talking about people with names like Fertitta, which many of your listeners may know very, very well.
Absolutely. And so you had, for the first time in recent memory, you had an equal fight. You had wealthy people on one side and a wealthy developer on the other side. And so finally, the odds were even. Now, there was a city council election in which former councilman Steve Soroka was elected, pledging specifically to oppose this project. That was one of the things he, on the campaign trail, said he was going to do. So he got into office and started the process.
Because of that, he ended up being criticized as a puppet, someone who was put into office by these wealthy homeowners who opposed the project, basically to do their bidding. And in many ways, he did that. He kind of earned that moniker. But I also want to make sure people understand that the Badlands Golf Course, it's not part of Queens Ridge. It is not an HOA-owned golf course. It's not part of their community in any way, shape, or form. It wasn't something that they operated. Maybe they went there and played around a golf, I don't know, but it wasn't in their community or part of their HOA. It was just next to their properties.
Right. I mean, okay, so if I'm hearing this correctly, basically a golf course went out of business. A developer bought it to build housing on it, but the people close to that golf course simply didn't want housing built on the defunct golf course. Is that where we are so far?
That's where we are.
Right. And that is a very easy and basic understanding of it. But one of the important things to keep in mind as well about those who oppose development on it is that the developer actually had the zoning. He had the residential zoning to put residential properties on that land. The zoning was there. He didn't have to have any variances brought in. The zoning for residential property was already there. And if you look throughout the law, zoning pretty much ends up trumping just about everything. But that didn't stop them from trying to fight it.
So then where did this go on? I mean, seems like he has the right to build the houses there. So how did this become a 20-year litigation?
Well, even if you have the zoning, you have to get city council approval of your project. You have to approve the master plan. You have to approve utilities. You have to approve easements and all of those sort of things. So he had to go to City Hall to get these permissions, hence the political drama, hence the election of Steve Soroka on a promise to oppose this project, and hence the council votes on these matters to prevent this from actually happening. And that formed the basis of this litigation.
I know that the homeowners tried to sue. They filed their own lawsuit against the city to essentially stop the city from allowing the developer to do what zoning gave him the right to do. So that was the very first legal toe in the water in this. Once that took hold and the city started denying all of the developer, Yohan Lowie's applications to do what he had the right to do on his land, he then had to sue the city. And side note on that, the city decided, with Soroka at the helm of the effort, to declare Badlands like open space, open public space for everybody to use. So they kind of clawed things back from him, and this took on an eminent domain tone that fed into the lawsuits. And Lowie had to sue the city because they basically took his land from him, illegally took his land from him, because they were carrying out the will of the homeowners, essentially.
And that land was bought and paid for.
He owned it.
Yeah.
Land was bought and paid for, but because they prevented him from developing it, he lost the value of his land, which has been the subject of these lawsuits.
And the city had the option of actually using eminent domain. They could have condemned this land and created a public park or a municipal golf course, for example. They could have done that. But had they done that, they would have had to pay just compensation under the Fifth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. They didn't want to do that. They wanted to control the use without paying what they would owe. And so as a result, they deprived him of the use of the land. And the Supreme Court of Nevada found very recently, quote, when a governmental agency acts in a manner that removes all the economic value from privately owned land, just compensation must be paid. Here, the city's action demonstrated a refusal to allow any development on the 35-acre parcel owned by 180 Land, that's Yohan Lowie's company, such that the parcel no longer had any economic value. Basically, the court said the city was never going to allow development on this property, and therefore they stole the value of this land from him. Now, this applies, bear in mind, there are 4 cases. There are 4 separate parcels of land, and there are 4 separate cases in various stages of litigation. This went to the Supreme Court, which is a terminal court in this state, and this reasoning applies really only to this one piece of land. The court was at pains to say this does not apply to the other parcels or any other case that may come before us. But if the facts are substantially similar, it is reasonable to think that the logic of this decision would apply equally to the other 4 cases. Bear in mind that the largest parcel has yet to come to litigation, has yet to come to a judgment. But in every one of these cases, at the district court level, every case that's come before a judge, different judges, different facts, same conclusion, that this was a taking under the Fifth Amendment. The city owes Yohan Lowie money. And I think we're now standing at about I heard a figure, $248 million. I added it up. It looked like $230 million. that could grow. That will grow, quite frankly, because interest is compounding every day. And the city could be on the hook for $500 million in this case because of the actions that they took.
That's billion with a B, folks. And Steve's right. As far as the interest accruing every day, one of my sources told me that it's about $18,000 a day in interest.
God.
That is accruing for every day that they do not pay these judgments that have already been rendered against them. Every single taxpayer, myself included, should be beyond outraged by the city's failed stewardship of our money.
I'm outraged, and I live in Henderson, so I've got no dog in this fight, and I won't be required to pay. I'm still outraged, though. The outrage crosses jurisdictional boundaries, but poor Darcy is on the hook to actually pay this. And if I was a resident of the city, as I was for many years, I would be outraged as well.
Hi, this is David, the CEO of CityCast. Do you ever find yourself holding back on travel because you're afraid of a language gap? Well, mind the gap no longer, as long as you have Babbel. Babbel is the science-backed language learning app. Its 10 minutes lessons are quick and handcrafted to get you talking your new language in 3 weeks. So I was reminded in the Olympics how much I love French. I had spoken French as a kid, but it has deteriorated to nothing. But I thought I would love to take a trip back to France with my girlfriend, but I'm embarrassed because my French is at 0. And I thought, why don't I get on Babbel and revive my French? And it's been a joy for the past few weeks. I'd forgotten everything. I'd forgotten plurals. I'd forgotten articles, vocabulary. Mostly I'd just forgotten how to speak and how to listen. And Babbel has me back on track with lots of speaking and lots of listening, because that's how you get better at a language. So I've been working on time, for example, and there's this way in French where when you say 2:45, you don't say 2:45, you say 3 o'clock minus 15. So, je rentre à 3 heures moins le quart. I'm coming back at 2:45. Anyway, it's so much fun to speak. And don't take my word for it. There's studies from Yale, from Michigan State University that prove that Babbel works. So here's a special limited time deal for CityCast listeners. Right now, get up to 60% off your Babbel subscription, but only for our listeners at babbel.com/citycast. Get up to 60% off at babbel.com/citycast. Spelled BABBEL.com/citycast. Rules and restrictions may apply.
Excuse me, can you take a photo of me?
Sure, but if you had the new Samsung Galaxy Z Flip 6, you could snap your own hands-free selfies.
Really?
Watch. I just flex it to the perfect angle, set it down, and FlexCam with Galaxy AI automatically zooms for the perfect shot.
Whoa.
Post-worthy.
New profile pic-worthy.
Flex the newest Galaxy AI foldable Z Flip 6. Get yours now at Samsung.com. Samsung account login required. FlexCam length varies and is shorter than standard zoom length. Galaxy AI provided free until end of 2025 on supported devices.
So the city could have used eminent domain, paid compensation for this land up front, didn't want to. Now Lowie is sued. There's 4 cases. They're working their way through the courts. I mean, what is the current status of his litigation? So we've got one Supreme Court ruling that is final, or is it being challenged?
The ruling itself has been rendered. I've been told that the city may ask the Supreme Court to reconsider their ruling. I've also been told that pretty much almost never happens. But that would be quite literally the finest Hail Mary they could throw in the state of Nevada. Now, of course, they can appeal to the United States Supreme Court if they really want to bankrupt all of us and continue to pay outside attorneys millions of dollars to keep up the fight that they have lost in every court at every turn. But with at least 2, and correct me if I'm wrong, Steve, at least 2 of the other cases that have already been ruled on in district court, the city has lost those cases. So if they want to appeal
they've lost
those,
every case,
every single one,
every case that they've gone, and this Supreme Court ruling, it's worth noting, was unanimous. There were no dissenters in this case, and so a rehearing is unlikely.
So would this have played out differently if this took place in a different neighborhood, one that was less affluent?
Yes, it would definitely have come out differently. There were neighbors who live on Desert Inn, and I'm going to get it wrong. I think it might be Desert Inn and Fort Apache. It might not be Fort Apache. It might be another street. But there was a proposal to put a Walgreens on the corner. The neighbors didn't want it. The lights would be shining into their backyards. It would lower their home value. The Walgreens is there to this day. You can go get Walgreens. You can go get your prescriptions today because the neighbors had no clout. And that's just one example and now I remember that one because that was the subject of bribery allegations against a county commissioner. But across the valley, you will see neighbors opposing projects. In Henderson, where I live, what used to be the Dollar Loan Center was put in against the wishes of those neighbors. The lights on that shine like the noonday sun all night long. It's there today. The neighbors were unsuccessful in fighting that, and it's generally because, and it's not always corruption. The Walgreens that I cited was possibly corruption. It's not always corruption. It's because developers know their rights, they know zoning, and they have the attorneys to vindicate those rights. And so when they go up against the neighbors, they sometimes have rights on their side. In this case, Yohan Lowie had the rights to develop, had the zoning to develop. And so he was in the right. But in almost all the cases, you've got neighbors, they don't have that power, and they're almost always getting a project that they don't want in their neighborhood.
And legally speaking, these homeowners did not have a dog in the fight. They had no standing whatsoever. No standing other than a NIMBY type of standing. So they had no right to the land. They had no use of the land. They had no ownership, nothing. But they inserted themselves through a politician that many say they funded to get elected to do their bidding, even though they really just didn't have any standing whatsoever.
Well, if there are any developers listening, do not try to build in a neighborhood full of lawyers. I think that might be the biggest piece of advice.
And massive casino moguls that have run this town forever.
Yeah. So in some of our mayoral interviews or Mayoral Monday series, this came up a lot. And it was mentioned that the payout to Lowie could bankrupt Las Vegas. Is there any truth to that? Darcy, it sounds like some of your taxpayer money is going to be going to Lowie.
A lot of my taxpayer money. Thankfully, I don't have to fund the tens of millions of dollars on the current judgment all by myself. If it gets up to $500 million, I frankly don't know how much is sitting in the city's coffers right now, but the fact that they're willing to risk that and willing to allow it to happen makes me hope that they have enough to cover such a loss. But Steve and I have talked about this also time and again, that it's not their money. It's not the city council people's money. So in many ways, it seems as though they're behaving like they don't care, while saying that they're trying to defend homeowners' rights, which in this case, honestly, doesn't make any sense.
No, Darcy's absolutely right about that. There is, if this were a private business dispute, for example, and I was the CEO of a company and I had been sued multiple times and lost every time, it wouldn't take two or three losses and then a Supreme Court judgment to make me say, we need to settle this. We're losing this case. We're going to bleed money if we don't settle this case. There's an incentive in private industry to avoid litigation because it's wasted money. When you get to a municipal agency, that same incentive is not there. It is the taxpayers' money, and the only disincentive that they have to rein themselves in is the fact that taxpayers may get angry at having their money wasted in litigation and vote the people out. But even if they do that, it is not their money. They are not personally on the hook for that money. And so it's not the same as a private entity, which would not behave in this manner, I don't believe, at all. So it's really, when you have this group who can continue to vote this way, nothing is going to happen to them. I mean, they all live in the city, so they're all kind of on the hook, for this. Now, I don't think the city will go bankrupt. There is such a thing as municipal bankruptcy, Chapter 9 bankruptcy. It has happened in other jurisdictions. But I don't think that will happen here. I think the city and its taxing power are going to be able to pay whatever judgment that this is rendered at the end of this process. But the question isn't, can they pay? The question is, should they pay? Should they have gotten to this point? And should they have settled sooner? And should they have capitulated? I heard one council member say, well, how can you negotiate a settlement when they still have to come for entitlements? Well, that's exactly how. You negotiate the entitlements. So there's still resistance to this day on the council for capitulating under some theory of slippery slope, like this is going to throw out the entire zoning ability of the city to zone land. That is absurd. It is absurd to think that.
Yeah. This was incited by a very small group of Las Vegas homeowners. But Darcy, it seems like it's going to have a much broader effect on everyone within the city limits. What is the impact if the city of Vegas continues to lose these lawsuits? What would that mean to residents?
Well, one thing it means to private landowners is that the city can just come in and take your land away from you that you own and prevent you from doing anything with the property that you've paid for and drag you through court for years. That precedent, that action has already been taken, and that precedent may well have already been set. So anybody that owns land should really be paying close attention to a trickle-down effect here. I also want to point out that the city's continued voting to deny Lowie's applications for entitlements and the other things that he needed, all of that was contrary to what their own staff and their own planning commission was recommending to the council. They recommended approval of this all along. So if they were willing to go against, if the council was willing to go against the recommendations of its own staff and planning commission, what does that tell you about what was really driving this? I think that is maybe the scariest thing for how it can affect everybody out there in terms of whether any of us can expect to get a fair shake from the city council if they're going to be able to be swayed by the whims of these few powerful people to an extent that carries on over so many years and impacts literally every single person who lives in the city. Do we want people in office who do this? That's our power right there, is to decide whether we want to keep these people in office or if this is the hill they're going to die on.
Do either of you think that this lawsuit will have effects beyond the Las Vegas city limits?
Well, I think other municipalities will probably take a look at this and say, if a landowner comes and they have an entitlement to build and their request is within the zoning, at the very least, we should give them a full and fair hearing, and notwithstanding the objections of the neighbors, and make it a more fair process, and not simply repeatedly deny it because we say this is something the neighbors don't want, so therefore we're not going to allow it. That's not how this works.
The neighbors have no right to the land.
Right.
They
don't own the land.
And the Supreme Court found that the city was hostile to development on it from the get-go. The Supreme Court said that. They saw the city's intention from the get-go, that they were always hostile to this. And that's not okay.
Right. As the court found in its ruling, that the city would not have allowed any development on this land. Not so much as a tent, much less a condo, much less a community of high-end homes. So that is not legal. If you are going to deprive someone of their land, if you're going to take their land, whether by eminent domain or by what has happened here, which is essentially de facto eminent domain, then the Fifth Amendment rights of the landowner come into play, and he is owed just compensation for the denial of the use of this land. Only in this case, it's the worst of all possible worlds, because not only does he still own the land, not only will he be paid for the deprivation of the use of the land up until this point, but he will still have the rights to develop, and eventually, I believe, he will either develop it or sell it to someone else who develops it. So what is the net? Where are we at the bottom line? The city's going to be out millions of dollars, some level of millions of dollars, and the concerns of those neighbors will be unavailing, and this will be developed anyway. This did not need to happen. At least it did not need to happen to this degree. And I think that's what you're seeing in these rulings is a screaming red flashing light saying settle.
So if the city in the end ends up paying out $500 million, will Lowie also still be able to develop on the land, or will the homeowners get what they wanted in that there'll be no development there?
No, the city will not acquire the land. They won't own it.
Oh, and many of those homeowners, Sarah, have already moved. They moved out years ago. And so some of them are still there. Many of them are not. But I don't know how many hours they're spending monitoring this anymore.
But to answer your question directly, Sarah, they will not be allowed to keep this land fallow. It will be developed. Well,
this is bonkers. Thank you both.
Badlands is bonkers. That's the title of the podcast.
This was extremely informative. Really, it's so bananas. And I think that this is going to be so helpful for our listeners. Thank you both for your time and for coming on.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for having us. We're going to continue covering this as well on Channel 13 because the story has not finished.
That's all for today here in CityCast Las Vegas. Hey, if you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend, rate, review, subscribe. And by the way, we put this episode together because of a listener request. You were talking about that you didn't understand the Badlands, and frankly, neither did I. So if you've got ideas for shows, reach out to us. You can call us, numbers in the show notes, social media, or send us an email as well. And we'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Take care.